Hi, my name is Yvonne Livingston, and I'm the community engagement coordinator at the Urban Youth Trauma Center. Wow, I am a caregiver though, right? So that title just really fits in too. Um, and today we're going to talk about trauma in parenting. And so to get through part of this conversation, you might hear me laugh a little bit because it's going to be difficult for me to talk about. And so think of this as my comic relief, not laughing at what happened or the situation, but it was very traumatic for me and my children. And so this is how I'm going to get through it. And I have with me today one of my esteemed colleagues. I really praise her all the time because of the good work that she does surrounding trauma and how she breaks everything down. So Lucy pretty much is going to walk me through some past events and bring me back out again, so I don't stay there. But we just want to make it very clear that the conversation that we're getting ready to have, we're going to talk about trauma, and I will get personal. So if anything in the video you need more information on, please visit our website at the Urban Youth Trauma Center and look us up. There's plenty of tools on there for you to use to get through some of these difficult topics that we're getting ready to talk about. So Lucy, I'm going to turn it over to you and you do your thing.
Hi, my name is Lucy. I am currently a psychology intern, almost done with my doctorate program. And my research focuses on understanding how traumatic events and victimization affects youth, whether emotionally, behaviorally, and how we can help them overcome those traumatic events. And clinically, I work with families who have experienced traumatic events, and we work together one-on-one with the youth, but also incorporating parents into the treatment so that they're able to support them. And then also, a lot of the time, it means talking to them about their own experiences and how to help them get connected to resources that they might need. I came to the United States when I was 11. I'm originally from Cuba. And so I myself had some experiences that I had to overcome, and it really made me passionate about, again, like understanding the trajectory from trauma and traumatic events to resilience, and sometimes not resilience in a way, but, difficulties, but overall how youth, especially youth of color, overcome those adversities and thrive.
Thank you, Lucy, for your introduction and telling us who you are. And before we dive right in, before I get in my feelings, I want to just empower you really quick to say the word resilient is a taboo for me because of my experiences here in America. Because you say you were from Cuba, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So we grew up pretty much in our early youth, from different countries being, on two ends of a spectrum, right? But I will say this, resilient as a child for me, now in hindsight, looking back, I want to use the word empower, or power,
okay,
right? Because it took a lot of power within me to survive, all the traumatic things that I had been through as a child, right. And so now I look at it very differently, because when that word was attributed to my children, when they were in grade school, and I was like, why does everybody keep using this word resilient, right? Because when I looked it up, it says, you've been through a lot of adversity, a lot of trauma, and then you've come out on the other side, man, you're resilient. We really did put you through some things, and you came out on the other side. And I'm like, well, that's power.
Yeah. No, it takes a lot of power.
Yes, and courage and confidence to move through difficult things. And so as a parent, in most cases, so I'm getting ready to jump in and tell a little bit of my story. And, if I start laughing hysterically, calm me down. But I'm a I'm a single mom. Mostly, I grew up in the city of Chicago on the South Side, and I have 6 children, 4 boys, 2 girls, and they all grown now. They all made it. I did not, you know, and my children did not end up in a foster care system because I was a dysregulated parent while they were growing up. There
Mm-hmm.
were a lot of events that happened in our lives that kind of made me, question my existence, let alone being able to function, as a loving, giving parent living in poverty. And so from that violence, of poverty, because it trickled down generationally.
Mm-hmm.
So as I started to navigate the space of being able to pay my bills, buy food, be present with my children, it was a lot to do by myself.
Right.
And so I my patience was very thin, like super thin, like razor blade super thin, because then my
Mm-hmm.
tongue would be sharp, right? And
Mm-hmm.
speaking to my children, as if they were strangers off the street,
Right.
And so that came from, being overworked, being overwhelmed, and not properly nourishing myself,
Mm-hmm.
so then how can I then at that point nourish my own children? And so there were a lot of events and spaces in their lives that I wish I was, a little bit more present. So it's
Mm.
like when I look at some of these movies, and they start talking about parenting and how, cute and cutesy it looked. I was like, that was not my experience. Like, not at all.
Right. It's a hard task.
Yeah, I'm like, wasn't nothing cute about this at all. It's like you get up one morning and your children then did all type of stuff in your home, and you're looking, you're frustrated. And the first thing you want to say is, and I'm an artist, get your ass up and clean up. Get this up, get this up. Why y'all do this and why you do this? And so all of these things
Mm-hmm.
are firing off in my brain. Like,
Right.
why did you just do this to me? Did you not watch me clean up? Did you not see me do this? Did you not understand how much time it took for me to get this up from you? And then you want to sit here and do it all over again.
Mm-hmm.
So instantly, my first reaction was to, right, just really hammer in with words or actions, right, to
Mm.
get them to be fearful of
Right.
doing any little things like that. And so when you come across families that have these type of situations, if even if they're able to articulate to you, fully,
Mm-hmm.
what it is that they're going through, how do you then tell, the parent and the child, hey, let's come down, let's come and sit down, and like, what happens in that type of situation?
So it depends on whether we're talking about a trauma framework. If I'm having a conversation with mom and a child, or a parent and a child that's gone through, maybe individually they've gone through a lot of traumatic events, or it might be that the parent is having a reaction to the trauma that the child just went through, and it's leading to a lot of conflict of, like you said, this kind of, and also, I think what you said is really important, the fact that you're overworked and stressed and worrying about the bigger things that children don't understand at that point in life, or not as fully. And you're trying to also parent, and it's about efficiency too, right? At that point is, I had the time to clean the house, and I did. And then in the morning, it's messed up again because you're acting this way. And in reality, like, there's children, right? So we know in a sense that it's normal for a child to do that kind of stuff. However, it's so hard because you as a parent are dealing with so much that it's hard to remind yourself that, oh, they're not doing it to get at me, or they're not doing it to ignore the work that I put in. It's just that in that state where they are, in the developmental age that they are, they're just not thinking about those things, right? And they're being children. But when you're in that situation, you need them to be a little more mature than maybe they're ready to be because you're dealing with a lot. So I understand where that's coming from, like that frustration of wanting that efficiency in your children because you have so much and you're alone and you're trying to do the best you can for them. And I think starting by saying that and just acknowledging that it's coming from, even if it doesn't feel caring, it's coming from a place of care because that is in that moment the capacity that you have to sort of teach your children, hey, like let's not do these things without thinking about other people. I would start with that, acknowledging that to the parent so that they hopefully they feel heard and they feel like, yes, I maybe could have said it in a different way and it was the way that I said it. And then we can also explore together what it made the child feel, right? So understanding that, yes, like this is the way that you were saying it, and it's coming from this space of feeling overwhelmed and overworked, and it's still impactful to the child. And how can we work on that? How can we be able to express in a, I do a lot of communication skills. Like I'll start by talking about using I statements, because that way you're still able to express how frustrating it is that you did all this work and that you didn't have time, but you do it in a way where it doesn't feel like the child's taking the blame. Because when we say like, you did this, why would you do this? Right? That you, like it kind of triggers that defense response in children too, and anybody. But when we say like, I feel really frustrated because I cleaned last night and I really wanted to have a clean house and I'm disappointed. So you're still conveying the same things, but you're doing it in a way where it's about your feelings and thoughts, and you sort of take responsibility for what you're feeling in that moment. Also, but also communicate to the child like, this is still not okay and this is why it wasn't okay. But it doesn't become about the child being like a bad kid where they feel like, oh, I need to do things perfectly because in the future I'm going to get a similar reaction. So I think I would just do that. I would have that conversation with the parent very openly, trying to do both, right? Like validate the experience and then give you an alternative to how to handle that next time. If I'm hearing a parent also describe that situation, one of the things that you said, it's like taking care of yourself. And it's a difficult conversation because in that place where you were, I don't know that if I come in and said, okay, you need to do self-care, you would have told me like, yeah, I totally understand you. I have so much time to do this thing, because you don't have time. Right? You're overwork, you're going through so many things, and for someone else to come in and say, okay, well, let's talk about self-care, it might be sort of like, well, this lady doesn't understand me. What self-care? I can't really like do that because I don't have the time to do that. So I would have a conversation where it's like, okay, what is self-care for you? And how can we do it? How can we find a time to do it? Because a lot of the time I get that response of like, well, I don't have time for that. But then when I tell them is, when you're riding on a plane, someone's telling you, put on your mask before you put it on someone else. And to me, that's like self-care. Like, how are you going to have the patience and sort of just the calmness to think through, how do I say this message to my child in this moment when you yourself are running on fumes? So you need to put on your own mask, your oxygen mask, before you put it on your children. So that means finding times where you are having a moment to yourself and feeling like you're taking care of yourself, whether that's taking a bath or talking to a friend or whatever it is, doing something that increases just your ability to take a moment to respond to that child. So I would talk about all those different things. Like, how do we get you to engage in some type of self-care that makes sense to you? And it's not just like an additional thing that I'm telling you to add to your already full plate. So like, what are some of the things that you do or you used to do? How can we include them back into your life? And then just hopefully help you and the child understand that sometimes in those moments, we need to take a deep breath and think about what kind of message do I want to say to my kid and how do I say this? But if we're trapped in that idea of, well, not even trapped, it just if we're at that point where we don't have that patience to give, which makes a lot of sense, it's going to be harder to do that. And I don't know if I'm answering your question. I feel like I'm rambling, but it's just basically, I feel like I would have a conversation with both of them and try to help you communicate in a way that's more helpful. Because I think it's good to for them to hear it. Because I don't know that a lot of times, I feel like, as an immigrant, being raised in a family, that didn't speak English, and I was aware of the stress, and I was aware of like the money problems. But I didn't hear my parents talk about their feelings of stress. And I think another thing that I encourage parents to do is, of course, to a developmentally appropriate way. We don't want to have our kids be our confidante for all the things that are hard. However, I think it is important to help model for them sharing emotions and allowing them to understand that we might not have the space in our mind right now to deal with something because we feel stressed. So I would encourage parents to mention that, right? And like, I'm really stressed right now. And this wasn't really helpful for me because I'm really stressed. And again, like using the I statement, like I cleaned last night because I wanted to have this clean. And right now I'm not feeling great that this happened. So I would encourage the parent to start sharing those feelings and thoughts a little more and see if that helps feel like you're not being as cutthroat, right? Like, as like, okay, I'm immediately gonna go to like tell you off because that's what happens. You don't have the time or patience because you're so stressed. But I wonder what happens if like you communicate with a kid and tell them like, I'm really, really stressed
I
right
can
now.
jump back in and then say this because,
Yeah, go ahead.
I was back there, and I was having a moment just sitting here thinking, yeah, I could have been a little bit more gentle with my words, but, that's not what happened. And, it was okay that, I said some of these things because that's what my mom did and that's what her mom did, right? And so now I'm
Yeah.
looking at this thing generationally. And so now that I do all of the things that you just stated, right? I had to start using I statements because then I started to understand psychology, going through the program and doing Black studies and all these things. And I started to realize that, hey, life did not happen to me in a vacuum, because now I'm looking at the history, I'm looking at the things that my mom went through, my grandmother went through, like all of that trauma came through, right? And it landed on me, and I started passing it on to the next generation. The dysregulation, nobody can like have a conversation that was communicable in the sense of, hey, we're having a dysfunction here. Let's everybody sit down and have a discussion, at Thanksgiving dinner, because that's sometimes, right? That's usually when some of the dysfunction comes out, over the table, while you're eating food, somebody will just say something, just blurt out something, right? And so I started being the blurter. I started being the one that said, I slaved in the kitchen all day to make this food. There is no possible reason whatsoever that I should wash dishes. My feet hurt, my back hurts. If y'all don't wash these dishes, it will not be another Thanksgiving meal cooked in this crib. I promise you, it will just not happen. And I stopped running away. I used to run away. I was all run away. I ran away as a child because then I got in trouble, and so I kind of seen what happens when you did that as a child, right? And not just from, somebody finding you is, once your family catches up with you and, they make sure you don't do it again, there's some punishment behind that. So, once you see one or two people go through it, you're like, okay, now I'm not going to do that. But as an adult, in order for me not to go off on people or go off on my children, because I was learning to like not do that, even though I was still bad at it. I was still bad, but that was part of my self-care. I used to run away and sleep in my car, girl, like for 2 or 3 days, because I had no money to go to a hotel. So I used my car, and I would just be in the, sleep and wake up and read some books, drive around, go to the park, and I had the police called on me one time. It's like, it's a strange woman in the park. And I'm like, I was reading a book. This was my
Oh
place
my
to
gosh.
visit, right? I guess they thought I was
Yeah.
gonna prey on some children,
Mm-hmm.
a Black woman sitting in the park is just really dangerous. So these are some of the things that, I would do. And so as I would come back to myself, right, after I've been gone for a few days, the first thing
Mm-hmm.
that was in my head was, did they miss me? Did they even look for me? Do they even care that I
Mm-hmm.
got so out of myself and I was
Mm-hmm.
just so stressed about the situation rather than hurt myself or anybody else? I said, well, let's just let me remove
Right.
myself from this situation and then just run away.
Right.
It was cold, and uncomfortable, but it was like that was something that I just wanted to do so I can get away and think to
Right.
myself, you know what? It is not okay for me to be treated like this. It is not okay. And so when I started telling my children these conversations, and we really started having some very, 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 very difficult conversations, and
Mm-hmm.
so it went from raising voices, because then one would say something that was, so impactful that it would start everybody speaking at the same time to address that one elephant that was in the room. And so since
Mm-hmm.
I was not in control of myself, I was not in control of my children. And I let them speak, how they need to. And so there were a lot
Mm-hmm.
of words that was just going around. It's like very hurtful and harmful, right? And so as I
Mm-hmm.
learned to navigate that space, because some of the words that they were saying were directed towards me and my
Mm-hmm.
ability to parent, and so
Right.
I was like, yeah, okay, now this is really hard for me. So when you said this to me, it really hurt my feelings, right? And at first, they didn't care. I'm just going to be completely
Right.
honest, right? There was not that empathy and compassion and sympathy that I felt I needed, right? So
Right.
so I'm going to say that, right? It wasn't strong enough for me to want
Mm-hmm.
to engage and have those type of conversations. And so as I began to love me a little bit more, because that was part of my self-care. Because
Mm-hmm.
once I was able to start articulating that, they are bad children, meaning, right, the words and things that you say to me hurt my feelings.
Mm-hmm.
How about when you didn't take out the garbage and I had to come in here and wash your dishes?
Right.
You made this mess. I did not do this. And
Right.
so now my sense of entitlement is you're old enough to clean up behind yourself. You're old enough to do this, 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 and this. And how about I did train you to do this? I know I did.
Right.
And so those type of conversations started happening a lot more frequently. And so what
Mm-hmm.
happened was they didn't like it. The defense, right? Because it
Right.
was always offense. They'd say what they needed to say. And, as a mom, I had to, respect their feelings and all of these things. But I was like, well, what happens when mom discloses her feelings? I don't like you.
Mm-hmm.
I
Right.
love you. I don't want to see nothing bad happen to you. But right now, I just do not like you. I don't like how you speak, I don't like your actions. Like it was really traumatizing for me to understand
Mm-hmm.
that how I parented when I did it right, they did the opposite. And and so it's like, I know I taught you better. So your behaviors, man, this is really like, ooh. And so then
Mm-hmm.
when you get to that point where you like the ooh, right? And I let my children know the ooh moments because back then I couldn't really talk about it, but right now, my one of my sons, and it's my joke. One of my sons called me one time and asked me to help him out. And so I
Mm-hmm.
looked down at it and I was like, okay, let me really tell him how I feel because he ain't called to check on me. He ain't came by my house to just sit with me. He did not just
Mm-hmm.
come by and rub my feet like I want to, give me a back massage, something, a flower, a
Right.
card to say, Mom, I need you. Like, hey, give me a hug.
Yeah.
He
Want to have
called
a
me.
relationship.
Right. He sent the text.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, my response was, welcome to mom's ATM machine. So
Because
from
you
that,
felt like you were being that it was that where they would contact you when they needed something and not necessarily to just like talk to you and have a relationship with you.
because I did that to I did that to my parents, right? You know, because that's that's what you get trained to do essentially. Because they're not there to meet some of your needs, and so but
Right.
they do meet some criteria your needs over here. So that's what you do. But then I was
Right.
confused because I did both sometimes. And so
Yeah,
to pick
you're
and
like you
choose,
tried to shame, right? Like you were maybe at first that wasn't happening, but then you work very hard on learning these things and try to change and provide both of those things. And it may be that they're still stuck in like the first part, right? Where it just I get what you're saying. So
yeah.
they're still seeing the maybe like the other needs, but not the emotional. Like they haven't like maybe come to the full realization that you are someone that can be there for them emotionally now, you know?
And I tell them not to call me mom in order for me, to activate. You can't call me mama because you take me back to the old days. And so, because then it's confusing to me, you'll say mom, but then you treat mom a certain type of way. And I'm like, mom should be treated this way. And you don't quite meet up to the criteria to call me mom again. So I'm like, no, mom. And they're like, that's disrespectful. I said, no, what's disrespectful is how you treat me as a mom. That's disrespectful, because you got to call me, you got to check in. You don't know, you know what I'm saying? Like, I was there for you for at least 18 years, at least.
Right. Right.
So now until you turn 36, this is your practice, how to reciprocate,
Right.
and so that's what I'm teaching now, the reciprocation of talking about how my children make me feel and being okay with me displaying those type of emotions because it helps me to understand other people, and it helps me to understand me connect with other people because if I can say this to my children, surely I can say it to anybody else because they're the most closest thing to me. I birthed, and so so looking at it from that perspective,
Right.
the trauma that I feel as a parent, now I'm saying, well, you're an adult and I'm an adult. So now two
Right.
adults having a conversation will look very different from a mother and a child having a conversation,
Right.
because that's what you were saying earlier, right? When you're talking to a child, you kind of
Right.
have to dumb it down a little bit, right? And
Just
say,
depending on it's sort of like depending on their developmental age, right? I think it's like I do think that relationships, just like anything, a parent-child relationship evolves. So what you're
mm-hmm,
saying makes a lot of sense of like, when they're still younger, I think, we're modeling how to co-regulate. And what you're saying is very important, like that intergenerational trauma and the intergenerational just like knowledge that we don't get. Like I didn't know how to do any of the things that I teach my patients to do now. I didn't know how to deep breathe. I didn't know how to regulate either.
mm-hmm,
My parents never taught me that. They didn't know how to do that stuff.
exactly.
So we go into the parenting, not having like those tools that haven't come from like, we have intergenerational knowledge that is helpful, but not others, right? And in this case, it's like that emotion regulation, like all those toolbox, like that toolbox, right, of how to regulate and have those conversations. So I think if and I think it for me it's more of like once you start talking to me, I'm gonna try to focus you on like the future because you're right about what you said. Like, yeah, that happened and I could have done X, Y, and Z, but it's not gonna happen. The reason I focus on like, okay, let's walk through that is more about what can we do in the future. Because we can
Mm-hmm.
change the path. What we can do is, okay, like maybe I didn't do it this time, but next time it happens, like, how do I want to say that? Let's practice this. Let's think about it. Because we can, and we do learn how to do those things. Like now I feel like I have those emotion regulation skills that I didn't have for a really, really, really long time. Right. So
I
now I'm
know,
approaching things differently. Like
right?
I'm gonna, like react differently to even people around me. And that brings me to my second point, which is boundaries. It sounds to me like, well, let me backtrack a little bit. So you were saying, yes, if they're children, depending on their age, and not necessarily dumb it down, but just talk to them in a way that they're gonna understand it. Because if they're a teenager, they might understand more of those things. Like, hey, like here's your responsibilities. These are the things that you need to do. You didn't do them. Well, there's a consequence for that because you understand what's happening, and that hurt my feelings, right? I feel hurt by you disrespecting like the consequences and rules of the house. If it's a younger child and they're just messing around, you can also express, like this is really frustrating. I feel frustrating because I clean, mommy cleaned, and now we have to like figure out what to do next. So I just think it just talking to them wherever they are, like meeting them where they are. That's what I would say. But then also as they grow older, your relationship is going to change and it becomes even more reciprocal, which is what you're saying. Like if we want to have a relationship, it's like anything, we're getting something of each
Mhm,
other, right?
mhm, mhm,
Hopefully emotional support and also like other support. But if one person is the one that's giving, and the other person's not really giving anything and just receives, either way, either if it's like a parent that's taking or the other way where the child is taking and not giving back, as the other person in that relationship, it becomes an unfulfilled relationship, right? Like something that's really not meeting your needs. And I
mhm,
think what you did is really powerful, which is talk about boundaries. If you want to have a relationship with me, like this is what I think of a relationship, and this is what I need to feel connected, to feel like I'm not being used. And I think when we start putting boundaries with other people, with our families, especially if they don't necessarily know how to put boundaries themselves, because that's another skill that sometimes doesn't,
mhm,
it doesn't get passed down. They will push and they will be like, but why are you putting this boundary? Like, how come? And it's a really difficult skill, but one that is very important to maintain those boundaries and explain to them. Like, this is why. Because if we're gonna have a relationship, I need this from you, right? Like, what am I asking for? And you were not asking for much. You're asking for probably like your child to check in on you once a week. Let's just talk about anything. Like, how was your day, mom? Oh, great.
I think that's
Instead
the
of
most frustrating part to me about
mm-hmm,
being a mom, right? That check-in
mm-hmm,
part,
mm-hmm,
because I want to check out and check in when
yeah,
I need to, right? And so
yeah,
having that space to be that way is, really what I crave, right? From anybody, not just my children. Um,
mm-hmm,
and so when you start talking about boundaries, I just start implementing those, and I'm still practicing, I practice using boundaries every day, and so as I get more efficient with it, no, it's just going to be a word that I'm going to use all the time. And just that, no explanation, no, it's a full statement. And I like that you said meet them where they're at, because that's pretty much how you have to do it. Meeting people where they're at, regardless of whether or not they're your children, because now I'm a child too. And I tell people, they be like, how old are you? I say, I just turned 50, but it's 5.0. So I put those two numbers together. I say, I am five. If I ask you some questions and if I start joking with you, don't mind me because I am 5 years old, okay? I might get a do-over because now I get to explain how I want to be treated and I can
mm-hmm,
articulate it and I can be confident in saying it. Why? Because I was a doormat for a whole bunch of people, not just children, right? And
right,
so now when
right,
we start looking at the empowerment of it all, my
mm-hmm,
power says this: yeah, I was a mother to you, but now I no
mm-hmm,
longer want to be. I want to be friends with you. Let's see if we can be
mm-hmm,
friends now. And
right,
so as I'm learning how to be a friend, because I know I didn't really train them how to do it because I didn't know how to do it back then, be a friend, you know.
right,
And so that friendship part that comes into, a mother, child, perspective is what
mm-hmm,
I'm learning now to do with my oldest daughter. And that friendship, that bond that we've created, I could have did that well before we just started. It's like now understanding what that looks like and You know, and I've heard parents say that I'm not my child's friend. No, I'm not your little friend. Don't play with me. I'm not your friend. I'm not your friend. Even I think, you know, but friendship means this. You create a
Mm,
space for your child to come and talk to you about anything,
right.
because that's what
Yeah.
friends do. You know, and when you
And I,
don't create that safe space, then,
right.
you know, it becomes a fearful space to do it in.
Mm-hmm. And it's like that role, right? Like the role is evolving. And I'll be honest, I'm one of those people that will say, like, you're not your child's friend. That doesn't mean that you have to be super strict or unsafe, right? Like, I love that you said, you know, be a safe space for your children, because that's so true, right? Like, can they come to you and talk to you without fear that you're going to react before they're able to explain themselves completely, or react in a way, maybe like initially a lot of the reactions is also we want to protect them. And so if, let's say, they come in with a problem and it's something, maybe they got in trouble, and it takes a lot of power and control to not react in that way of
Mm-hmm.
wanting to protect them and be like, how come you do that, right? So it takes a lot to just be like that safe space where, okay, thank you for telling me, that was really difficult, and then just like help them cope with that situation. I think that's a beautiful goal to have with kids of, I'm the safe space for you. I do think why I say like they're not your friends is because I feel like friends, they need a certain, we have needs, right? And I think friends do have that complete reciprocity where I think you get there with your children. I think at first it's more of they're going to not be able to fulfill those needs for you, and because you know they're pretty much like they have all these needs, they're the ones that have all these needs, and we're like just trying to meet their needs as we go. But as they grow older, they are able to meet some needs of showing affection and being understanding and all those things, and so the role is going to change. And so an adolescent and young adult definitely can be, you know, your friend. I think mostly when I say that is talking about younger kids where we are there to provide some like training wheels and some safety rails, and you can find a way to do that and also be open, if that makes sense. I don't know if I'm explaining myself, but I think I hear a lot of like, I hear a lot of that when there are no consequences. And that's why I'm always like, okay, let's talk about what you mean by your kids are your friend. Because to me, sometimes that means they're fulfilling my needs and I don't want to upset them because we're friends. And so they are not going to get maybe like boundaries or consequences. And that's when I talk to the parent. I'm like, okay, let's talk about, you know, what might be happening there. Is there like a fear or thought that if you put this consequence or if you have boundaries for them, they might, you know, resent you, or you might not get as much like love and affection as you want. And that's a good conversation to have because they're actually going to give you the love and affection. If anything, I feel like having those consequences and boundaries and understanding like, okay, there's, you know, our relationship at this point is I am teaching you how to survive in the world. I'm giving you all the skills. Um, I think it's a good, it just helps them, I think, realize that there's differences for a parent. Because I do, and that's my own belief. I think like parents are for most of the time, like on maybe until the kids are teenager, I do think parents have like this there's a hierarchy, right? Like you have to they don't know about the world.
You
So they
know,
don't know about the world.
I would agree with you in some parts, and then here's how the disagreement could fall in.
Hmm.
Looking at this in hindsight, right?
Right.
My oldest daughter, was my friend, and so how that friendship, you know, took place was, you know, I did train her to, you know, help me with the other children, and, you know, taught her how to cook meals and all these different things. And so
Hmm.
sometimes she would jump in and do those things before I even asked her to, right? And so
Right.
was it an expectation? I believe so. but then there was also, she didn't give me a lot of pushback to do it. And so now when we have those, now when we have our tough conversations about, what she did, back then to help me, navigate being a single mom, she stepped into a role of a parent.
Yeah.
She really, really did. And now I really appreciate her being there and what she did and how she did it. There wasn't
Right.
a lot of pushback, it wasn't a lot of, I'm grown, I'm this, I'm that. She just did it. Right. And so part of now our friendship is now me learning how to be a friend to her and what that looks like,
Right.
and having her guide me and tell me what our friendship should look like because we are mother and daughter. And so told her, I said, well, this is a two-way street. What I do for you, you also do for me. And so if I can
Right.
tell you when you're messing up, surely you must tell me when I'm messing up too. And so when we start
Right.
having these type of conversations like this, it was tough in the beginning. I'm not even gonna lie and tell you, it was easy for me to hear her say some of the things that she said to me that
Yeah.
she couldn't say as a child, and so now I'm taking it all in, right? I'm soaking it all up and I'm giving her something different, something that she can use as a tool in her life to navigate the spaces that she goes into. Because I'm very frank, I'm very open with those type of conversations because that's something that I would have wanted for someone to do for me, have those open conversations like that because my daughter trained me real, real good. She did. She's an excellent teacher. And one thing she said to me that I like really grab hold to and I apply it to everybody. She says, Mom, sometimes as a child and as a young adult, she said, I just wanted to experience some things. I just wanted to do it. Yeah, I
Yeah.
knew it was gonna burn me, but I wanted to do it. And it
Yeah.
just really got me to thinking because that's what I did too. I knew it was
Right.
gonna burn. I knew I was gonna get in trouble. But it's like, I got to do it. I'm just gonna go ahead and do it. I'm just gonna jump in. And so now what we navigate and say, what does it look like to jump in? Just know that you're gonna have some experiences, even if I don't, because I'll warn, I'd be like, girl, don't do that. Don't do that. This gonna happen. Don't do it. Don't do it. And she's like, I want to experience it. So now instead of that, I told you so and waiting for, when the ball falls out of her basket, not saying, I told you so, but just walking her through it and saying,
Yeah.
what lesson did you learn from this? What won't you do
Mhm.
again? What will you repeat? What was the experience? So just really dissecting that thing. And so that's
Mhm.
part of the friendship now for us is me learning how to be the friend to her that she was to me as a child and as a young adult. The girl left college and came back home to help me with children. So
Right.
that was a friend, and it was a
And
good
uh, and I think it makes a lot of sense. I think like I mean, and I hear that a lot in families, like immigrant families coming, like my family. The only reason that didn't happen is because my parents didn't have other children, right? So I was an only child for a really long time. But I would have to like sit down and pay the bills because again, they didn't speak English. So I had to take on a lot of like those responsibilities to help them. And I totally understand why it happened. And honestly, it's what you needed at that moment. And you probably, I don't know how you feel, but it sounds like she really helped. And it would have been so much more difficult to do everything that you did without her. And I wonder if like some of the conversations that came up was her kind of mentioning maybe that was difficult for her too at that time, like that
mm-hmm,
responsibility
mm-hmm,
because I guess that's something that has happened to me where I think a lot about, could I have said that to my parents in that moment? And I would not change it for the world because they needed the help and I could give it and I would do it again. And I'm sure your daughter would.
mm-hmm,
However, it does create a different dynamic, right? Like that hierarchy. Because when I say hierarchy, it's not like, oh, I'm better than you. It's more of like I have life experience and you're under my care and I am gonna teach you all these things and give you those training wheels. And that doesn't happen sometimes. Like I'm an example of that. Your daughter's an example of that because she kind of had to learn how to do those training wheels along with you, right?
Exactly.
And I think it makes a lot of sense that you guys had that type of relationship, and now it evolved into a different type of relationship where you're kind of giving her, it sounds to me too, like now you are giving her like those training wheels or rails, because that's what it sounded like when you were saying, okay, I'm not gonna say don't do this, because that's one thing, right? Like learning kids how to learn on their own is a big thing too that parents struggle with. But you're right, like we want to keep them safe, but giving them a little bit of limits, but
hmm
also allowing them to do those things, to be like, okay, like you did it. Woo, let's talk about it. I think that's what you're doing for her now. You're putting those, like in the bowling alley, you have those rails up and she's doing the experience, and now you're talking her through it. So even though you're a friend, you're also doing it in a very like motherly way, in my opinion, where yeah, it just sounds like a really wonderful and strong relationship. And I think if you could have done it, right? If you didn't have to be her friend, would you have chosen to do the same? If do you understand what I'm asking? Like if you had the people helping you at that time, if you had, weren't overworked and single mother, would you have given her that same amount of like responsibility, or do you think you would do it differently?
I don't think I would have given her that much responsibility
Mm,
because when I did get married, and then I got sick and I had to stay home, a lot of those
hmm.
things I picked up, I took back from her to give her back some of
Okay.
childhood, to give her some freedom and space because she went to Columbia College
Oh, nice.
for college,
Hmm.
and I let her move away, and that dorm room was stupid expensive, right? But I
Yeah,
wanted her to have the experience of
that
being on her
experience.
own, right?
Right.
And having her own space and, that whole college experience. Luckily for me, she didn't like living with other people, so she came back home. So it worked out, we had to spend all the money, but that was a reward for me to her, to say, go see what it's like to be by yourself, away
Hmm.
from, your siblings because, you help raise five, even
Yeah.
the older brother, because when you're cooking a meal, when you're ironing clothes, it's the
Hmm.
sharing, it's the whole communal space. And that's what she
Right.
did. And so part two of our conversation, Lucy, because, we'll keep talking.
Yeah, and I'm just gonna say, like, then the reason I asked is just of, like this acknowledgement that, things went how they went and they needed to go that way because that's what helped both of you and everybody survive, and it makes sense. And the reason I asked is just like this idea of like acknowledgement of what you just saying. Like when I was able to, when I was maybe had more capacity to pick up those things I did,
Mhm,
and I gave her the space to be a child, or I gave her the space to be like someone that didn't have all this responsibilities. And I love
mhm,
that because it just shows that progression, right? That evolution of, you didn't have the capacity, right? Because, and it wasn't because of you, it's like the structure, everything that's going on in the world, right? Like the society that we live
in the
in, putting,
world.
right, putting
Okay.
all these things in America, like
Yes.
all these societal things and biases and systemic discrimination and racism, and all of those things contribute to being a single mom that's working multiple jobs probably just to make meet, and having that stress, and then having to raise the children, and the intergenerational trauma and intergenerational, maybe like not having those skills. So all of those things play into it, and so you did the best you could in that moment, and she was there with you and she helped you, and they all came out wonderful. And the moment you were able to have maybe less of those stressors, and you were able to have more capacity to pick it up, you you on purpose made sure that she was able to gain some of those experiences. And I think that's the important part. Like, are
Mm,
we open to learning? Are we open to trying to, say, hey, you know what, thank you for doing that. I'm sorry you had to do it, right? Because I feel like for me, just hearing that, I'm like, I wish I didn't have to have you like help me with all the things. And like, you know what? Thank you, because you're the reason that we all
Mhm.
survive. And
Exactly.
I think that goes a long way to
Hmm.
acknowledge.
So
Anyways, thank you for having me.
she in effect became my sister mom way
Yeah,
back
yeah.
then. Yeah. And so now like I said, I fully comprehend and understand her sacrifices.
Hmm.
As I understand my own, because I had to do the same thing with, in my family. So that's what got
Yeah.
handed down, and those are communal spaces within, communities of color. A lot of times that's what we do, to
Hmm.
make ends meet and to, complete circles, is that we
Hmm.
use whatever's around us, for our
Right.
needs and purposes. And so part two of our conversation, because it's going to be a part two, Lucy. I'm sorry. Um, because this was really good and really great, especially when, the questions start coming out, and so this is part of, the regulation part for me to help parents see that it can be done,
Hmm.
and wanting you to understand all the external factors around you that contribute to your dysregulation. It's not just you. You're not just
Right.
having a meltdown for no reason. Your children aren't either. It really is life happening to us while we're navigating life, in our spaces. And
Mhm.
sometimes it can be traumatic. And, we want to have the moments where, it's like, how do I figure this out? How do I not be like this? And sometimes you don't have the tools in that moment to pause, and get it. And so someone like me or Lucy, coming together and having these type of discussions can be very, very helpful in navigating those dysregulated spaces. And so I want to talk about the helicopter parent with you on part two, because
Okay.
I had that bad and how I turned out like I did.
Sounds good. I also wanted to say something because I think at one moment, I just want to say it's never too late.
It's
It's
never too
never too
late.
late
Never.
to, repair the relationships to both ways, right? Like not
Mhm.
only it like have that self-respect, because it sounded too that you have to find you're like, I have this value and I don't feel like I'm being treated the way that I should need to be treated. And so it's never too late to learn your value and to repair those relationships with your children and have it be both ways. Like,
Mhm.
let's talk about the things that I did that weren't great. And then now let's talk about the things that are happening that are not great, that I don't feel, valued or respected. And like, let's both work on how to change those things so we can have a positive relationship. It's never too late for that, I think.
Thank you,
Just
Lucy.
wanted to leave you a message
You
of
all
hope.
turn in next time for the next Parent Talk series. We're here at the Urban Youth Trauma Center. And so we love to have you join us in these conversations, because we're going to eventually open this up. Hey, Lisa.
Thank you. Bye.